apologize for it. Um, but the purpose of the lecture today is hopefully to sort of discussion and to get into the idea of social and economic conflict and its importance for crime generally and criminal decision making at the individual level, like the situational aspects of the criminal decision, criminal act itself. And let's just think that it's a theme we're going to get on over the next few classes, actually. To get us started, I want to introduce you to this fantastic book that we don't actually have time to read in this class. But if you're looking for reading materials over the summer, it's a really good place. The book is called Rich Get Richer or Record and Poor Get Richer. And it is, I read it, it's a fantastic book. I highly recommend it. What's very important and interesting about this book is how it frames the phenomenon of crime. How it frames the phenomenon of crime. It's not like it understands crime not just as a behavior, but also as a socially constructed meaning, something we talked about at the very, very beginning of the course. When crimes are defined in law, so the system agreement like the system is a very predatory action intended to exclude or de-emphasize equally or more dangerous predatory. Well, there's something about the socially constructed nature of crime that is unequal in a sense, that focuses our attention, our social consciousness around the phenomenon of crime, not to the behaviors of like anarchists, but instead to the behaviors of people who might victimize us in kind of a street crime level, the individual level. And we're sort of ignoring these broader social harms generally. And so as a result, a little bit later, they say the criminal justice system, is a carnival mirror. That is the metaphor that's being used here is very important. The carnival mirror distorts our understanding. The image of the criminal, the image of crime provided by the criminal justice system distorts our understanding because it presents us with a false notion of the things that actually threaten. It's not just day-to-day victimization, but there's something more broad that we should be concerned about. And this is important for folks today because we're trying to situate the notion of crime and criminal behavior in these big, broad social and economic arrangements. And as we've noted from the part, crime can be understood at least in part as a meaning. Crime is something that is not inherent to it, but it's something that a society, or at least some members of a society, have identified as something worthy of punishment, sanction, something that is wrong and worthy of punishment, sanction. There's something that's socially constructive about it. Within this understanding that crime is a meaning that's constructed by social audiences, we have two key understandings. Like, how does this process come about? The first is the consensus view or gaze, and the second is a conflict view. The consensus view, something we've sort of hit on a little bit as the semester has unfolded, is this idea that criminal law reflects all of us, the general will of the people, the kinds of behaviors that they view as morally wrong and reprehensible and worthy of punishment. That's what comes to be reflected in law. That's a consensus view. It's a criminal law and punishment is a reflection of the consensual will of the people. As that will changes and evolves and is different across areas, across regions, that's going to be reflected. The second view is a conflict view. This conflict view, which is kind of the view that's represented by Ruby Light here, is that it reflects the values and priorities of political, economic, and social elites, those who make the law. It reflects their priorities, their values, and it's used as a tool. The law is used as a tool in sort of broader political and economic conflict. Most people, I would say, sort of assume that criminal law reflects the collective conscience, that set of the deeply held and widely shared values, that consensus view. But there's pieces of evidence that kind of support the alternative. There's some evidence that suggests that maybe there is something to this conflict view, that criminal law reflects not our own values, our own interests, but the interests of a select group of people who have power. And these two pieces of evidence relate to crimes of the powerful and crimes of the powerless. We're actually going to talk about the latter rather than the former. With regard to the former, crimes of the powerful, the hardened behavior of the people are not often given the meaning of crime, even though there can be widespread public about the criminess, the wrongfulness of those behaviors. We want something to be done about it, but yet nothing gets done about it. There's all different kinds of examples that we could talk about. But in general, the crimes of companies, the crimes of governments, the crimes of corporations tend to go unpunished, or they're not identified as crime at all. Again, that pointing to that notion of crime and harmony. The simple piece of evidence in support of the conflict here is that where political and economic conflicts are more robust, where they're more prevalent, where they're more intense, crimes among the powerless seem to increase. There's something about the political and economic structure of places, maybe of countries, that seems to produce differences and variation in the amount of crime that occurs among the powerless. The amount of street crime seems to be tied to these broad social structures. We're talking about exactly what that means longer. This is the idea behind it, sometimes called radical criminology. Radical, if you know, sometimes radical is used to mean like extremist. That's not really what the term means. It means like getting to the roots. Radical criminology, and this is like trying to get to the root of what crime is, like all years. But radical criminology is funds crime as a product of political and economic conflict. Crime is a product of political and economic conflict. The argument goes that in many societies, under all different kinds of political and economic arrangements, when capitalism gets picked on, but it's not capitalism certainly, there are a few big economic, small slices of the pie comprise of big winners. And while the rest basically comprise a group of relative losers. So the winners are like 0.001% of income earners, and they hold out. They're the ones who run the companies, they make the law. Capitalists, those of us who are in the working class in a broad sense, or are in the non-working class, those who are unemployed, especially chronically unemployed. There's a lot here about making time. The idea is that the winners do everything in their power to ensure that the powerless do not become the powerful. They mobilize tools of political and economic and social power, including perhaps even criminal law itself, to try to maintain the status quo, keep things as they are. And some of this might involve taking advantage of the losers, might involve exploiting the losers, especially in economics. So we're tying this sort of general understanding of like economic relations to the phenomenon of especially street crime. That second point we're talking about, crime among the powerless increasing where there's political and economic conflict. The idea here is that in these kinds of arrangements where there is more inequality, when there is more conflict, the losers sort of learn to follow the examples of winners. The losers come to exploit and victimize those around them, those who they perceive as weaker than themselves. So you see like normal street crime, everyday street crime, coming to reflect this sort of big power issue, social arrangement kind of stuff. So if we're trying to get to a specific testable hypothesis, the specific testable hypothesis is this. Where there is a more unequal distribution of wealth, where there is a more unequal social arrangement between those who have and those who have not, street crime is going to increase. Crime is going to increase. Crime is a product of the unequal distribution of wealth. And this is kind of how it works. This is kind of how it goes. In these kinds of arrangements, a few different things happen. The first is that you have the growth of material generation, which can be accompanied by crimes tied to need, economic need. You have the widespread social destruction of secure bulk banks, something that we're going to be talking about. The call of public services, support systems, formal institutions, including political institutions and informal institutions and networks. If you're getting institutional AOB vibe from this, you are not wrong. And then the spread of materials, sometimes described as commodity fetishes. Things come to be viewed as commodities in themselves. Things like family, things like relationships, everything becomes a commodity. Or whereby the priorities of the community become less important than like individual competition. All of these things can happen in places where there is more inequality, social and economic inequality in particular. So even if you have some place where economic inequality is not particularly robust, it's not something you have a more sort of equal society. Even though society is not going to be totally crime free, the idea though is that where there is more inequality, you're going to have more crime by virtue of these kinds of mechanisms. So the lower classes are going to respond to the social arrangement and the disparity in social arrangement. And that is going to eventuate in more crime among the lower classes, among the power classes. So the independent variable is income inequality in particular. And our dependent variable, the thing I'm trying to claim is like all the theories that we talked about thus far, is the phenomenon of crime. So how does this work? Well, note here that we're looking at that's actually something that's ended. So you can see it's alongside institutional AOD theory. Some of these out. This is one of only a few mainstream national level theory of unit of analysis of the country rather than state data for the individual. So this is some data visualization that comes from the Economist. It's only 3 years old from 2017, pretty good. And the focus here is on the relationship between income inequality at the country level and a few different outcomes that are related to crime or are represented. Here's a second for it. It's a little much to take in. So income inequality here is measured via the Gini coefficients. You know what that means? It's an imperfect and sort of controversial actually measure of income inequality. So that's sort of on the x-axis for each of these four graphs. On the y-axis, we have the proportion of people who say yes to any of these four dependent variables. So they have no confidence in the police. They don't feel safe walking home alone. They've had money or property stolen. And then we have been assaulted. And by that, in each of these four instances, we have crime, then we have fear, crime, and lack of trust in the police. We see a sort of general positive correlation. And where the countries that have more inequality, where those countries are, those are also the countries that have the most crime, the most fear of crime, and the most lack of trust. And these countries are in South America, and Sub-Saharan Africa. These are the countries that are most unequal and have the most crime. Some people think the United States has the most crime in the world. That's not the case by any stretch. There are many more dangerous places than China. So there's a question on exam 3 that asks you what regions of the world have the most crime and also are the most economically unequal. It's not the United States, it's not Western Europe, it's in Sub-Saharan Africa, it's South America. And if we're looking at homicide, the relationship is basically the same. Although the colors are pretty, you can zoom in, you can see the names of Honduras stuff. This is why a little bit old because El Salvador has made kind of a news recently because the president of El Salvador is basically